Good afternoon, everybody. This is Rachel Treese on Flex in the City, and I'm delighted to have with me on the show today, Åsa Norrie. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, Åsa, who is the Global Head of Strategic Alliances at Standard Life Aberdeen in Scotland. Although she is not Scottish, she is our first Finnish guest on the show. Welcome, Åsa.
Thank you, Rachel. It's great to be with you.
You're very, very welcome. So as our first Finnish guest on the show, I think all of our listeners would love to know a little bit about your story and how you came from Finland and ended up in bonny Scotland.
Yes, of course. Yes, I'll share my story. Yes, it was certainly a challenge thinking of finding a travel agent who would find travel options to Scotland from Finland in the mid-90s when I came. So yes, I have an economics degree in master's in economics, and I thought it would be helpful to improve my English, which was really quite poor at the time. And I decided to apply for an Erasmus scholarship. And because of the league table ranking of the Strathclyde University's Business School, I chose Scotland as my first option. I had also spent a good bit of time analysing with Wärtsilä Diesel, who I did a paid dissertation for, where they would have good customers in the world and English speaking. So and Scotland came up high in the rankings. So here I came in January 1995, and I'm still on this journey.
And you are married to a Scotsman, I understand?
I am, yes. Since 96, I've been married to a Scotsman, yes.
Wow, and three teenage children?
I do, yes. One is second year university, one is turning 17 on Valentine's Day, and one slightly younger than that.
Wow, fantastic. So I'm very curious to know, so as a Finn, I'm sure you will have seen a lot of newspaper press about the Finnish Prime Minister and a lot of senior female leaders in the Finnish Parliament. So I'm curious to know what your opinion is on Åsa and why Finland?
Yeah, why Finland? Yes, it's a great question. I think our new Finnish Prime Minister, female Prime Minister, is very quick to point out the fact that she's the third female Prime Minister in Finland. So she's not the first one, which I think we have mistakenly noted in some of the publicity we received on her. She is one of very many senior female leaders, both in the political scene in Finland and as well as, I guess, in the corporate world as well, and I guess in local authorities and governments generally across the Nordics. We have seen a lot of female come into powerful positions. Why Finland? I certainly discussed this topic quite a number of times with many of the investors I meet, and I think back to the many times when there's been kind of difficult situations between Russia and the US, and many times there have actually been former Finnish presidents who have been the so to say the Kofi Annan, the key peacekeepers and the negotiators between those two big power units. So I certainly think that Finland and Finns have the reputation of perhaps being the calm in the storm in a number of situations on the global scene as well, and certainly also in the sporting world. There's been a number of Finns who have been very successful in doing a great job over the years.
Fantastic. And quotas. We did have a little chat about quotas just before we started recording this podcast. What's your view on quotas?
Yes, so we've seen this in practice, I guess, across the Nordic region, where there's very much sort of a 50-50 split, and in the public and quoted organizations on the various stock exchanges, where you need to have as many female representation as male. I would argue that for me personally, this is my personal answer to the question. I, as a senior female leader within a British London Stock Exchange quoted company, would want to be securing a senior role based on the merits of my qualifications rather than the fact that I'm female. But I do understand why many people feel strongly that the only way we will make rapid enough change here is by adding some sort of a quota, whether it's 30% or 50% or whatever that quota is certainly, I have seen a big shift in the last even 3 years within our company in terms of the focus of attention of looking at what that female talent pool is for various roles that we are recruiting for.
Interesting. So I'd like to go back, if I may, to how you started your career. And a little bird has told me also that you are on your fourth career, and that you started your career in the fashion industry, which I'm sure some of our listeners would be quite interested to hear about. And I'm quite interested to know what you think that financial services could learn from the fashion industry, if anything.
Yes, well, I did indeed, yes. So I did start in the fashion industry, and I guess I had very many times in my teens been told by my mother I had such slouching shoulders and knobbly knees, and wasn't walking straight, and wasn't sort of doing the right things for my own posture and well-being. So I guess it was a big surprise to my family and most of my friends at the time that I actually then was able to earn my living based on my looks for some time, which was very rewarding, because it gave me great opportunities to travel the world and actually learn about different cultures and languages and business etiquettes and how best to influence depending on where you were and what business context you worked in. But there are certainly a lot of times also I felt early on in my career perhaps that I made it harder for myself to prove to people around me, certainly from my previous career in fashion, that I could do the job required as a portfolio manager, initially European equities, despite the fact that I was someone who came out of the industry, so to say, into this. What can we learn? I think we all know, for good or bad reasons, that the fashion industry changes, every quarter. It's a bit like publicly listed company, there's quarter reportings, but there are, normally 4 seasons in a year in fashion, and it's instant. Everyone wants to some lesser or greater sense be involved in the fashion debate and think about what they wear or how they appear. And that's sort of more connectivity with a much bigger group of people that the fashion industry have. I think we have a great number of aspects to learn in the financial sector. We are perceived to be pretty, boring, albeit boring and stable is probably a good thing these days, but it's perceived to be pretty slow to change, to penetrate new things into. So there's definitely those things I think we have to learn from the fashion industry.
Yeah, there's always things to learn from other industries, as you've probably heard on some of our wonderful Flex in the City podcasts. So in the short time I've got to know you, I can see you're a woman with incredible integrity and somebody with real purpose. So what would you want your own legacy to be on the financial services sector, Åsa?
The whole aspect of seeing success, everyone wants to be part of success, and I take that in the very greatest sense. Success can be various things. For me to see someone achieve exam success within our graduate pool who've been sitting a CFA exam, or seeing success in us securing a mandate from a local authority we've been engaging with a long time, or us seeing success about actually really getting our audience to understand what we stand for as a business and how our culture is really sort of starting to come together as something completely new. That whole legacy that I can be part of and forming and being a good positive culture carrier and leader within our company, and hopefully stand as a role model for some of those sort of younger people generally, and women in particularly, coming into or considering our industry general. That those are values that are important to me. And I sit on a girls' school board, a council, and they also have a charity, and I think those things are things I work with a lot of those members of that are sort of 16 age and plus older within the school, of what are important things to consider if you consider the financial sector, and if you're not, why not, and why could you consider that our industry.
And as a mother of teens, I'm curious to know that if you were trying to attract young people into the financial services, what would be the messages that you'd give to those young people in order to attract them to the industry?
it's an industry that's going through a lot of transformation. It's not just our company, but the industry is going through a lot of transformation. We need people who are technology savvy, who are very interested in data. I think data is the new oil. If you talk about it, actually what data can do, and knowing how to manage data and think about data is something really key. A lot of young people I speak to worry about the fact that AI and robots are going to take over a lot of jobs. And I say to people that the whole aspect of relationship will always be done by humans. And the whole aspect in terms of in the financial sector, there are a large part of that connectivity that needs to be done by humans. There are a lot of aspects, like in other industry, that can be automated, but that's such an exciting, and I think it's almost now or never in terms of now is a very, very interesting time to be part of our industry because of the change. And obviously that's a lot linked to the regulatory change. We talk a lot about, from a jargon, sadly perspective, the democratization of risk. And that very much means that we need to think about less the government and the grander UK PLC looking after us from the cradle to the grave, and more about the responsibility for our retirement and our future years needs to be held by the individuals, each and every one of us who live in the UK or indeed anywhere else. That's something I feel passionate. Finland is one of the 3 countries in the world that have the oldest population. So Japan, Finland and Italy have the 3 oldest population in the world. And I think we in the UK, in my role as a board member on our own staff pension scheme, that's something we think a lot about. How do we think about engaging the young pool of population, but also those who are perhaps already in retirement, and of course everyone in between who are active members of our pension scheme.
I think we need to invest in some fish, don't you, Åsa? When I think about Finland and Japan, it's fish came to mind. So, I'm you know, as a strong female leader, I'm curious to know who has really inspired you, either in your family or outside of your family, to be the leader that you are today? Who's been there and inspired you in that?
There's a few, I guess. So I will start with my family. My late grandmother, she made it to slightly over 100 before she sadly passed away. But she had my father in 1941, in the time when there was war. And she didn't know she was expecting twins, but she had twins. And my grandfather was away in the war, and she brought up the twin boys on her own for nearly 5 years. And she had a very active, hard-working life in actually really building the credential for them as a family and how they would stand for and have the right values in moving forward. And also post my grandfather's retirement, she made another career in her life, and in terms of her engagement with a much broader population, and kind of very much demonstrated those values that I would like to stand for, and I'd like to think I stand for in my own values, both as a mother, as a wife, an employee, and as a leader for our firm. My father and my uncle have also been successfully kind of really big entrepreneurs in their thinking of kind of business sense and running both own businesses and working for big PLCs. And I think the way they have had this sort of business mindset have very much rubbed off on me, and in terms of my thinking and the relevance of the fact that actually we all need to have, you know, nothing in life is a charity, all of it. So we need to have a business and a professional financial way of how we think and how we drive the work ongoingly. So I'd like to think there have been strong influences more today. And in terms of the work I do, I suddenly see Harry Nimmo as a sort of a role model for me. He's the honorary consul for Finland in Edinburgh, Aberdeen and St Andrews, and he certainly is someone I link in closely. He's also one of the top portfolio managers for smaller companies, equity smaller companies across a number of pieces. And I think the values he stands for and the ethos and the sticking with what he knows in his area of expertise professionally in the equity portfolio management is admirable. In thick and things, he sticks to his principles of investments, and that stood him in a good stead over 10, 15 years of investments long term.
Very good. So you've been inspired by all of these people. I'd love to know how you would describe your own leadership style, and how do you personally inspire others also?
I'm someone who is who always lead by example. So I'm a very honest leader. I believe in telling people constructively the feedback they should have. I'm very much about the team and me. So it's very much a player coach approach in terms of how I lead, and I'd like to inspire people. And I think I alluded to earlier, everyone wants to be part of success. So if you look to be very much being a successful leader, a successful role model in the firm, people want to be part of that. And that brings loyalty, and that brings sort of long-term commitment. And also our clients, ultimately, we can never be arrogant enough to think that Standard Life Aberdeen PLC's products are the best on planet and everyone wants to buy them. There will always be another 2 or 3 products that are equally as good as ours. So then it comes down to people. And I sometimes say, have you got your lucky tie on today, or have you got your lucky shoes on? Because a little bit of a giggle around the fact that actually it's all about the personalities at play. Would they rather meet with us regularly around discussing the performance on the funds they bought from us, or what do they want to rather choose one of our peers? So it's always important to think that, humbly, we can't be arrogant enough to think that it's just us who are relevant for the community. Many others are the same. So then it comes down to the soft skills.
Absolutely. The word humble has come up for me a few times. So you are the head of global relationships of strategic alliances, and can you go into even a little bit more depth about what that means, and what are the key characteristics that leaders need to have to foster those great relationships that you build?
Yes. So the key thing is long-termist and helping. I would also say a solution mindset. So gone are the days when it was all about pushing product, and people were switching and changing portfolios on a far too regular basis and incurring a lot of costs. It's very much thinking about do you as a client have a problem? If you have a problem, we should look to be finding solutions for you. So that is very much how we within our global strategic alliance function want to work. And clearly those that I'm responsible for are very much those sort of biggest relationships that we have. Most of the time it's also the most complex because of the type of relationship we have. This might be a joint venture, or might be perhaps some shared ownerships, and it might be, most of the time it's very multifaceted. All of the times it's different time zones and different geographies and regions, and it requires a multitude of different levels of engagement across many channels within our business functions.
Very good. So I'm going to circle back to female leadership now, Åsa, if I may, and talk about the female leader, which can be none other than the Queen.
Yes.
And clearly she's had a crisis to manage, the Megxit crisis, as it's touted in the press. What's your view on the Queen as a leader, and perhaps how she's handled that crisis?
Yes, well, I mean, anyone has crisis. She's unfortunate enough in sadly being in such a public position that those crises are always very public in her life. But I admire the Queen very much from the fact that in terms of, I admire her leadership style in that she's rising above all of this noise and nonsense, and actually she's who she is, and I'd like to think I represent a very much a alpha female leadership style, and I think she does too. She is who she is, and she sticks with it, regardless if pearls are fashionable or not. She has her lovely pearls, as you can imagine. I like pearls. She has her dress sense, regardless of if blue is fashionable or not. She doesn't get disturbed or distracted off her course when someone threw something off the cuff at her. She smiles. She is just someone, I think, that adapts to the world environment, whether it is within her own family, there is a crisis, or whether it's a crisis within the UK government, or whether it's linked to politically some instability or anything else. She stays relevant, and she stays incredibly popular and she stays incredibly fondly thought of by, in my view, most people. Very few people you ask would say that they do not like the Queen.
Absolutely, absolutely. She's a remarkable woman, really remarkable woman. So we're absolutely on the same page about our dear Queen. Also, if you had some advice for young financial services managers, what would it be? What would your message to them be?
Yes, it's a very big question, Rachel. In this area of a lot of change, I would say, staying adaptable, having an open mind, not being afraid of change. I know that's always challenging because change is not easy. It's things that a lot of times you can't control, so it's difficult to not be afraid of it. But I've always tried to work hard in terms of showing my commitment. And again, the last one I'll say, which again is at times hard, but I try to always stay positive. If you can take a message in two ways, try to take it in a positive way. Don't try to read things in a negative fashion. I think that will stand you in a good stead as a young financial service manager or a leader in our industry coming through today, and have faith with what you stand for, and it'll take you far.
So also, would you encourage kids to join the banking industry?
Well, why not? I do think we have a challenge. I mean, I head up our early careers program here, and anything between school leavers age 16 to work experience, summer interns, and the graduates, all the way to the mid-20s, sort of are within my area of responsibility. And I would certainly say that there are so much more opportunities today than there were when I came into the industry over 25 years ago. And I also think that is perhaps in those days coming into banking, asset management, or going into the medical industry, or going into teaching, these were sort of really high up there. They were the top three sort of professions that you considered. I think today we compete very much with very different industries. We know the rise of Amazon, Google, Apple, the technology, and just the whole aspect of being part of this design and this change in a different way attracts our young people very differently today to what the industries were when I grew. So I do think that the interest of being involved in the industry at the moment is very relevant, because we are going to go through a lot of change in terms of how we engage with our investors going forward. So now is certainly a very good time to join.
Very exciting time, isn't it?
It is absolutely. You can be part of that sort of very much innovation stage now in a very different way to you would have been some 20 years ago when I came in.
Yeah. So also as a fun, we always end Flex in the City up with a really fun question. So I'd love to ask, if you were investing in a fashion brand, you used to be a portfolio manager, which fashion brand would you invest in and why?
Well, I am Finnish, a Swedish-speaking Finn, so I'm going to go back to Finland to give an example. I think Marimekko as a brand has stayed relevant. I mean, I remember my mother, when I was a young little girl, having Marimekko curtains, and I knew a friend's mum who had a lovely Marimekko dress, and and I still today see regularly Marimekko in some of the very latest fashion magazines. And we have clearly had a huge amount of various cycles over the last 30, 40 years, that when I've seen Marimekko as a brand stay relevant and stay there. And I certainly do think that, thinking about that brand and the design in itself, and how they managed to kind of broaden and deepen that sort of design range and product range over the years is something that I admire them for.
Absolutely. We even had a shop here in Luxembourg, Marimekko, so I'm very familiar with the brand. So I think you made a very good decision, and I think it's a very sustainable brand too. So Åsa Norrie, I would love to thank you for being on Flex in the City, and the words that I'm going to go away with from our conversation today is is your belief in the power of belief and determination, and that's something that will really stay with me. So thank you for being on Flex in the City.
Thank you, Rachel.